The 12 disciples of Jesus Christ were more than just followers. They were the foundational pillars of the early church. Each of these men, hand-picked by Jesus himself, carried the gospel to the farthest corners of the known world. Their faith was unshakable, their mission unwavering, and ultimately their devotion led them to pay the ultimate price. Today, we journey through the powerful yet tragic stories of how these brave disciples met their end. Peter, the rock upon which Jesus declared he would build his church, was one of the most prominent disciples. After years of leading the early Christian community, Peter found himself in Rome during the reign of Emperor Nero. Known for his fiery passion and unwavering faith, Peter continued to preach, despite the increasing persecution. When finally arrested, Peter was sentenced to crucifixion, a fate he considered too noble for himself. In a final act of humility, Peter requested to be crucified upside down, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. His martyrdom became a powerful testament to his faith and has been remembered throughout history. Andrew, Peter's brother, was known for his missionary zeal, traveling as far as Scythia, Greece, and Asia Minor to spread the gospel. His message of hope and redemption resonated with many, but it also attracted the ire of those who opposed his teachings. In Greece, Andrew was arrested by the Roman authorities. Like his brother, he was sentenced to crucifixion. However, Andrew requested to be tied to an X-shaped cross rather than nailed, so that his suffering might last longer, allowing him more time to continue preaching even as he faced death. For 2 days, Andrew continued to preach to those who passed by, until he finally succumbed to his injuries. James, the son of Zebedee, also known as James the Greater, was one of the first disciples to be martyred. As part of Jesus' inner circle, James had witnessed many of Christ's miracles and had been present at the Transfiguration. James's boldness in spreading the gospel in Jerusalem drew the attention of King Herod Agrippa I, who sought to curb the growing influence of the Christian movement. James was arrested and swiftly executed by the sword, making him the first apostle to die for his faith. His death marked the beginning of a period of intense persecution for the early church. John, the brother of James, was the only disciple to die of natural causes, though his life was not without suffering. Known as the beloved disciple, John had a close relationship with Jesus, even being entrusted with the care of Mary, Jesus' mother, at the crucifixion. John's unwavering testimony and leadership led to his persecution under Roman Emperor Domitian. He was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he received and recorded the visions that would become the Book of Revelation. Despite the harsh conditions of exile, John continued to write and encourage the early Christians until his peaceful death in Ephesus at an old age. Philip, another of the 12, is remembered for his missionary work in Asia Minor, particularly in the region of Phrygia. Philip was a man of great faith, performing miracles and converting many to Christianity. His efforts, however, eventually led to his arrest in the city of Hierapolis. Philip was martyred by crucifixion, though some traditions suggest he was also stoned before being crucified. Even in death, Philip's influence continued, as many in Hierapolis came to believe in Christ following his martyrdom. Bartholomew, also known as Nathanael, is said to have preached the gospel in regions as far as India and Armenia. His profound knowledge of the scriptures and his passionate preaching won many converts, but also angered those in power. In Armenia, Bartholomew's preaching led to his capture. According to tradition, he was flayed alive before being beheaded, a brutal and agonizing death. Despite the horrific nature of his martyrdom, Bartholomew's legacy as a faithful and courageous disciple endured, inspiring countless Christians to persevere in their faith. Thomas, often remembered as Doubting Thomas, would ultimately become one of the most adventurous of the disciples. After overcoming his initial doubts about the resurrection, Thomas's faith became resolute, driving him to travel to distant lands to share the message of Christ. Thomas journeyed to India, where he established Christian communities that would last for centuries. However, his success also led to his downfall. Local religious authorities, threatened by his influence, eventually had him martyred. Tradition holds that Thomas was speared to death, sealing his testimony with his blood. Matthew, the former tax collector turned disciple, authored the gospel that bears his name. After Jesus' resurrection, Matthew traveled far and wide, spreading the teachings of Christ. According to tradition, Matthew met his end in Ethiopia, where he was martyred while performing his missionary work. The exact circumstances of his death are unclear, but it is believed that he was either stabbed or stoned to death. Matthew's legacy endures through his gospel, which continues to guide and inspire Christians around the world. James the Less, often identified as the son of Alphaeus, played a significant role in the early church, particularly in Jerusalem. As one of the leaders of the Christian community, James was known for his piety and commitment to the teachings of Jesus. James's leadership, however, drew the attention of the Jewish authorities. According to tradition, he was martyred in Jerusalem, either by being thrown from the pinnacle of the temple or being beaten to death with a club. James's martyrdom marked another chapter in the persecution of the early Christians. Jude, also known as Thaddeus, was another of the 12 who carried the message of Christ far beyond the borders of Israel. His travels took him to places like Mesopotamia and Persia, where he preached and performed miracles. Jude's efforts eventually led to his martyrdom, likely in Persia. Tradition holds that he was clubbed to death, alongside Simon the Zealot, who was also martyred in this region. Jude's legacy continues, particularly as the patron saint of lost causes, reminding believers of the power of faith in the face of overwhelming odds. Simon the Zealot, often identified as a fervent nationalist before following Jesus, channeled his zeal into spreading the gospel after the resurrection. His missionary journeys took him to Africa and eventually Persia, where he preached alongside Jude. In Persia, Simon's preaching led to his arrest and eventual martyrdom, believed to be by crucifixion or being sawed in half. Despite the gruesome end, Simon's passion for Christ and his commitment to the mission left a lasting impact on the early church. Matthias, chosen to replace Judas Iscariot, is one of the lesser-known disciples. However, his contribution to the early church was significant. Matthias is said to have traveled to places like Cappadocia and Ethiopia to preach the gospel. Tradition holds that Matthias was eventually martyred, possibly by stoning or beheading. Though his story is less detailed than those of the other disciples, Matthias's inclusion among the 12 underscores the importance of every follower of Christ in the spreading of the gospel. These 12 men, though ordinary in many ways, were called to an extraordinary mission. Their faith, courage, and willingness to lay down their lives for the gospel have inspired countless generations of Christians. Their stories remind us that the path of discipleship, though often marked by suffering and sacrifice, leads to the ultimate victory in Christ.